Today in our 2017 Volkswagen Jetta, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the CURT Class 1 Custom Fit Trailer Hitch Receiver, part number C11474. So here's what our hitch is going to look like once we have it installed on our Jetta. It is going to sit right below the bumper, and that cross tube is going to be visible just right below. Now our hitch is a Class 1, which means it's going to give us that 1¼ by 1¼ receiver tube opening. And it's going to be great for adding a bike rack or a cargo carrier onto the back of our Jetta. Now the way we're going to mount all of our accessories is through the hitch pin hole here on the side. And it is going to accept a standard 1/2" pinning clip. The safety chain connection points are going to be a plate style welded to the bottom of the receiver tube and the cross tube. And as you can see, we're not going to have any trouble getting most size hooks on or off. Just keep in mind, if you are using some rather small hooks, it may be a little difficult to get them in through the side here. Our hitch is going to have a 200-pound tongue weight, which is going to be the maximum downward force at the receiver tube. It's also going to have a 2,000-pound gross trailer weight rating, which is the amount it can pull, including the trailer and everything we have loaded on it. Now keep in mind that you always want to double check your Jetta's owner's manual and never exceed the manufacturer's recommended weight. Now CURT also recommends the use of a stabilization strap anytime that you're towing any non-trailer loads or any loads that aren't supported by tires like bike racks or cargo carriers. I'd like to give you a few measurements, and that's going to help you when deciding for accessories for your new hitch, such as a bike rack or a cargo carrier. From the center of the hitch pin hole to the outermost edge of the bumper, it's going to be right about 5 inches. Now that measurement is going to come in handy when you're looking at folding accessories to make sure you have adequate clearance so that it won't come in contact with the rear bumper. And from the ground to the inside top edge of the receiver tube opening, it's going to be right about 9¾ inches. At that height, I would definitely recommend a bike rack or a cargo carrier with a raised shank. That way we get that little bit of extra ground clearance. So now that we've seen what our hitch looks like and gone over some of the features, let's show you how to get it installed. To begin our installation, we're going to come to the very rear on the passenger side, and we're going to have this plastic underbody panel that we're going to need to remove. Now we're going to have 3 Torx bit screws that are holding it in place. We'll be using a T25 Torx bit to pull those out. We're also going to have 2 plastic nuts that are holding it in place. We'll be using a 10mm socket to pull those out. Now these aren't going to they're not going to come all the way out of the panel. They're just going to loosen up, and then we can pull down to remove it from the stud. Once we have all those removed, we're going to go ahead and set the panel aside because we will be reinstalling it later. Now we're going to have our Evap canister underneath that panel, and we are going to have to temporarily lower it down. So we're going to have 3 bolts that are holding it in place, and again, we're using that 10mm socket. So once we have all the bolts loose, we're just going to kind of move it a little bit just so that we get access to our frame rail here. Now on the driver's side, we're going to have to lower the exhaust, and we're going to be doing it by coming directly to the muffler, and just towards the center, we're going to have 2 bolts holding the hanger in place. Now normally it is a good idea to support the exhaust to make sure it doesn't hang down too far, but if we follow it back, it's going to be above the axle here, so it really can't go too far anyway. I'm going to take a 13mm socket and pull the 2 bolts out for the exhaust hanger. Now when we do lower our exhaust, we don't want to slide the rubber hanger off. We want to make sure that we take it down by the bracket and leave the hanger attached to the muffler. Now on the passenger side frame rail here, we're going to have several holes that are going to be in the bottom. Now towards the very front, we're going to have a rather large hole, and if we move back, we're going to be working with the hole right behind it, and then the next one right behind that. So we're going to take our fish wire, we're going to take the coiled end of it, we're going to feed it in through the hole towards the back. Quick trick is if you just put a small bend in it, so that when we put it in, it'll face down. Should have a little bit easier of a time getting it to come through the access hole. If you need to, you can kind of reach up into the frame and grab the coiled end. Now, you want to make sure that you don't pull it all the way through. You want to leave that tail sticking out. So then we can take our square spacer block, slide it over the coiled end of it, and then we're going to grab one of our 7/16 carriage bolt, which is going to be the smaller of the ones in our kit, and we're going to thread it onto the coiled end. Now, one piece at a time, we're going to feed our hardware into the frame. And once it's in the frame, we're going to go ahead and pull our wire until it comes out the bottom of the frame. Now we're going to repeat that for this hole as well. Now we're going to have to move to the inside of our trunk, and we're going to have to remove all the floor coverings. We'll pull out the mat that's covering our spare tire, all the tools, and the spare tire itself. Now on the driver's side, we're going to have a gray plug at the bottom of our trunk. We're going to need to pull that plug out, so I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver just to pry up on it and pull it out. Now with an extra set of hands, we're going to raise our hitch into position. On the passenger side, we're going to feed the fish wires through our hitch to the corresponding holes. We're going to raise it up until the bolts are going to be coming through the hitch. Now once we have our bolts coming through our hitch, we're going to remove the pull wire. And we're going to take a 7/16 flange nut and get at least one on this side so it'll support the hitch. Now on the driver's side, it is going to be easier if we flip our exhaust hanger down and back so that we can get our hitch in between the frame up here and our exhaust hanger. We can rotate it back into position, and you want to sandwich the hitch between the exhaust hanger and the bottom of the frame. Then we can take our 13mm socket and an extension. We're going to feed it up until it lines up with the factory holes, and we'll get them loosely started. Then we can get the rest of our hardware in at least hand tight. Finally, we can pull our pull wire off, put our flange nut on the other bolts at the bottom of the frame. Now we're going to have one more bolt hole on the side on our passenger side frame rail, and we're going to use the same technique of taking our pull wire, feeding it in through the hitch and in through the frame, and we're going to feed it back until we can reach it at the access hole. Now once we have it out, we want to be extremely careful because this is a rather long run, so we don't want to pull our pull wire out from the top. So again, just slide over that spacer, put our 7/16 carriage bolt in place, and then push each piece into the frame. And we're going to pull on our pull wire. It may take a little bit of wiggling back and forth to get it to come out. And we can remove the pull wire. You want to be extremely careful not to push that bolt back into the frame. And then we're going to secure it with another 7/16 flange nut. Now we can move back into the inside of our trunk. Now from the inside of our trunk, we're going to have a teardrop shaped spacer with a square hole along with a 1/2-inch carriage bolt. Now this is going to be sitting on the floor of our trunk, but to seal up the area that we had the grommet, I'm going to take a little bit of silicone, I'm going to put a bead around my spacer, and that'll prevent any kind of exhaust fumes from entering the inside of our vehicle. Put some silicone on our spacer. We're going to take our carriage bolt, drop it through, and have our bolt drop down, and then lay our spacer down, making sure it's seated all the way. And that silicone's going to make good contact and fill up any kind of gap that we may have. And just for good measure, I'm going to come back and I'm going to put a little bit of silicone going around the edge of my spacer. That way I know I'm not going to have any leaks. And we can come back and clean up any of the excess silicone after we're done. So So our bolt did drop down through the bracket coming back off of our hitch, and we're going to secure it using a 1/2-inch flange knot. Now whenever we go to tighten this down, again, you just want to make sure that you don't push the bolt up into the trunk. Now that we have all of our hardware in place, we can start coming back and snugging it all up. And for our M8 bolts, holding our exhaust in place and our hitch on the driver's side, I am using that same 13mm socket. Now over here on the passenger side, for our 7/16 hardware, I'm going to be using an 11/16 socket. Then for our 1/2-inch flange nut here, we're going to be using a 3/4-inch socket. I'm going to come back and I'm going to torque all of my hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. And we'll repeat that for all of our remaining hardware. You just want to make sure you double check the torque specs for each bolt, because each size is going to have a different rating. So we can go ahead and lift our canister back into position. Just want to make sure all the holes line up and it's resting in the little tabs. We can grab our 10mm socket and bolts and put them back. Now in order to get our panel back in place that covers our Evap canister on the passenger side, we are going to have to trim a small section so that we have a relief for our hitch here. And I already went ahead and marked out the area that we're going to need to cut, and basically if we find that little indentation that's going to be at the back of our cover, we're just going to go right on the inside and about a 1/2 inch out, so that it's about a 1/2 inch wide, maybe a little bit more, and about 5 inches long. So we're going to cut this out so that we can bring our cover in and slide it in place so that relief will be there so we can get it all the way in. I'm going to be using a rotary tool to cut this out, but you can use whatever you have available. A razor knife or a pair of tin snips will work too, since it is just plastic. Now we can test fit this to make sure that our cut is going to be big enough, because we can always cut more if we need to. So with the panel trimmed out, we're going to come from the front side, bringing it towards the back, line up our panel, making sure that the nuts get started on the studs, and then we can start replacing all of our hardware. Now all we have left to do is put our spare tire back and all the floor coverings in the trunk. And that'll finish up your look at the CURT Class 1 Custom Fit Trailer Hitch Receiver, part number C11474 on our 2017 Volkswagen Jetta.